Over the past few weeks, we've seen remarkable volatility in financial markets and increased uncertainty about the performance of the economy in light of this virus, this pandemic. This is a good opportunity to take stock of financial market conditions and to evaluate policy options. I'd like to spend a few minutes with you to discuss those. Over the past 10 days or so, financial markets have shown remarkable volatility. We've seen equity prices going up and down every day by 5 to 10%, sometimes more. We haven't seen this kind of volatility since the financial crisis, and in some measures, not since the stock crash of 1987 have we seen such volatility. That's been going on for a few weeks as the implications of the coronavirus have become more evident. One question here is whether financial market prices today are a reflection of the fundamental values of securities and equities and firms, or whether they reflect panicky behavior. There's actually no evidence right now that the prices that we're seeing reflects panic. This is a very deep and potentially very long-lasting macroeconomic shock. Literally thousands, if not tens of thousands, of small businesses may go under because of this virus shock. And despite the best efforts of the government and financial market participants, we should just be prepared that these prices that we're seeing, these very low prices relative to earlier this year, are simply a reflection of reality. So I wouldn't hold my breath for a recovery in prices or for investors to somehow become more optimistic and bid up prices, although it would be wrong to say that financial markets are perfectly efficient and the prices that we see today are accurate reflections. It'd be hard for, I think, anyone to support the view that they are either too high or that they are too low. In the last week or so, we've seen additional signs that financial markets are not working properly. Last week, in the middle of the week, Treasury markets became quite dysfunctional. This is the deepest and most liquid market in the world. When Treasury markets are not working properly, it's very difficult for firms, businesses across the country to get financing of their own because banks and bond markets really don't know how to set prices. We would normally think of Treasury markets as the foundation of financial markets and rely on their stability. And from there, other markets can be stabilized relative to Treasury markets and priced relative to Treasury markets. History has shown, and actually financial economics has shown, that this is generally not a good idea in terms of providing stability to financial markets. And it's typically U.S. policy not to close financial markets, but rather to give investors an opportunity to rebalance their positions and for prices and price discovery to inform investors about the fair values of assets so that when they trade, they're able to trade based on the information that markets are producing. In all developed markets, there's been a just hammering of equity prices. Corporate bond prices generally are way down. It's going to be much harder for corporations around the world to borrow money. And that's a lifeline for firms. Firms rarely issue equity, and they can survive low equity prices for quite some time, but firms are using debt markets all the time to raise working capital. Foreign central banks are doing everything possible, but they had already used up most of their ammunition on the monetary policy side because interest rates had already been set close to zero or below zero, even in Europe and Japan. Just as you might guess from looking at a map of the coronavirus, it's a true pandemic and all countries are adversely affected. The Fed actually has the opportunity to do more and has done more since the weekend. It's already begun introducing the use of its emergency lending powers under the Federal Reserve Act, Section 13.3, which haven't been used since the financial crisis. Already 2 new emergency lending programs have been reintroduced. So with these two emergency measures in concert with the Treasury Department, the Fed is providing additional loans to the economy that are not just of the normal variety. One possibility is, provided that Congress and the Treasury Department go along, that the Fed could start purchasing corporate bonds in the corporate bond market to support the costs of funding to corporations across the country. The Fed is not allowed to do that on its own because that would be considered a fiscal measure that that Congress would need to backstop. But with permission and a budget from Congress, the Fed could supply even more emergency lending into the economy if this macroeconomic shock from the virus gets sufficiently severe. And it does look like it's going to be quite severe. This is really a matter for fiscal measures, strong fiscal measures coming from legislatures and Congress to spend money as needed to support the economy, to provide emergency services, to build hospitals, because the more hospitals there are, the shorter the duration of this crisis will be. If you increase the number of hospital beds and respirators and other essential medical services that are available, then the economic suppression of activity can be relaxed because hospitals will be able to handle more patients and the economy can recover more quickly. I do regret that things weren't done as rapidly as they might have been. But on the other hand, we are where we are. And the United States is in relatively good position, having had a very strong economy coming into this situation. And the speed with which the virus has hit the United States is not as rapid as it has been in some countries. So there is an opportunity to conduct mitigating and suppressing activities so as to keep the severity of this crisis down to levels that are more manageable than they are in some other countries, as we have seen. The resolve of Americans is quite remarkable. In a year or two, it may take that long, the economy will get back onto its normal growth track. The most important thing that governments can do is to support their economies with strong fiscal measures. So I'm an optimist, and I do think that everything is going to be fine if we're patient and we do everything that can be done to support the economy and support the attitude of Americans.